The name of this series is basically Feywild, and I strongly believe that in order to understand the Feywild or have an understanding of the Feywild, we need to get down to the basics. So the first step that we are going to take is we're going to talk about the origins of the Feywild, some stuff about folklore, about mythology, about legends, things that will hopefully help us understand and build a good groundwork for the next episodes, in which we will talk about how to use Feywild and how to understand the Fey as they are. In recent years, the Fey creatures had a certain influx of interest in popular culture. We're talking about movies like Hellboy, Hellboy 2, we're talking about things like Pan's Labyrinth, but also comic books, the recent movie on Netflix, Tressa. Fey and Fey-like creatures are piquing interests in the popular culture and the popular society. But let's take a step back and think about what the Fey origins actually are. The Fey come from, they are an amalgam, a mixture of different speculations about things that happened in our natural cycles of life. They are a mixture of beliefs that they are our ancestors, that they are ghosts, that they are somewhat demons. And we see that in fairy tales that you can read in basically every region in the world. Although those fairy tales or those Fey that we know as for today are actually mostly based on the Western European folklore and Western European mythology. That does not mean that Feywild has to be somewhat locked into that certain part of the folklore of the world. You can, and you probably even should, incorporate parts of your own folklore and own mythology into your world, as it is relatively natural for people to tell stories, and you should tell stories that have a clear anchor in your own region or in your own territory. Belief in the fairies is a rather universal thing that can be found all around the world. So although the most common conception of the fairies, how they look like, how they act, how they what they do, what's their customs and so on, although the most common are from Western Europe, Western or Central Europe, and mostly predominantly, let's say it from British England, although most of the ideas stem from this place, ideas about fairies can be found all around the world. And from my own background, there's a lot of Slavic fairies and Slavic fairy tales, Slavic mythology that could easily fit into Dungeons and Dragons. But there are also things that you can find in Japanese culture, like the yokai, things that you can find in Persia, things that you can find in Arabic countries, things that you can find in Africa, in Southern America, and so on and so on. Because fairies are a reflection of a much broader spectrum of ideas, and as I said earlier, they reflect the human nature more than they reflect a certain community or certain type of culture that they are submerged in. A very interesting allegory, or a very interesting parallel to the most common Western type of Fey and Feywild is a very famous movie picture, Spirited Away, that clearly shows Far Eastern patterns that would easily, if taken away the cultural spectrum of it, they would easily fit into the Western types of perceiving the Fey and Feywild. Feywild or Feyfolk are based in our deepest subconscious ideas and understanding of the natural world and natural phenomena that is around us. So if we look at how the Fey monsters, for example, are today constructed, and they are based on our fears, on our hopes, on our ideas about how the world works and how it looks like. Let's take an example of the simplest of the Fey. let's take a pixie or a fairy. A pixie or a fairy would almost always be described as a slightly mischievous creature that loves pranks, that loves to steal things, that loves to watch watch human beings as they see them as fun. And they are practical pranksters, let's say. That is something that is strictly and basically derived from our understanding of things going missing in our natural life. So if you lost your keys or whatever else, your wallet, your notes, notepad, whatever, you might think that those were fairies that took them away for you, especially if an item that has been lost has been found several days later in the exact same space that you believe that you checked earlier. So in that way you can explain to yourself or to your surrounding what happened to that simple object. Another good example of this is the medical side of the human condition. We often have medical states or medical conditions that are hard to explain to other people or hard to explain or understand by ourselves. For example, if you've ever had sleep paralysis or read or heard about sleep paralysis, well, sleep paralysis is basically what a night hag is in Dungeons and Dragons. It prevents you from standing up. It wakes you during the night and it makes you feel that something is squishing your chest. That's basically what a night hag does in Dungeons and Dragons with her one of her traits. But fairies predate Dungeons and Dragons, predate the medieval times, and predate basically written history, probably. We could most certainly try to trace beliefs in fairies and the so-called wee folk much earlier than we have actual archaeological written evidence, because each condition that a human has also predates the written conditions. Since fairies were often seen as creatures that are connected to the spirit land, to the undead, to basically dead or our ancestors, it was also commonly conceived that they live in burial mounds. Unnatural or artificial heaps of ground where dead bodies were buried. This also is a reason why there's a common conception that fairies are strictly connected to demons, or in medieval times the devils, because they live underground in caverns, in some hidden structures that were underground, and hell was underneath us. So fairies and devils had to have things in common. And if you take other examples of monsters from the monster manual, for example, if you take satyrs, or if you take nymphs or other creatures that are not only pranking human beings, but they are also luring them, they are also tricking them, and they are also making them do things with bargains. The connection between devils and the fairies or the fae is very, very clear here. Let's stop for a second on things that the fairies or the fae did, especially in medieval times, to humans that kind of seeped into our nowadays understanding of the fae and nowadays usage of the fae in our games. So the fae could harm people. That is one obvious thing. So if in medieval times you would have a stomach ache, or you would have problems with your bones or other unexplained medical phenomena, that could be the reason. The cause of that could be a fae that was just playing a prank on you. And in the same way, if you have a good spirit, a good fae that was a protector type fae, that protector type fae could get you out of your sickness that you, for example, had. Let's say that you have a cough that was a simple allergic cough, and it happened in one moment of time and it stopped in a different, all by itself. you could explain it by the strength of your organism, by medicine, and so on and so on. But for a common folk in the medieval times, this would not be so simple. It could be clearly connected to a good protector spirit of the household that has that you in some way struck a bargain with, for example. So we'd believe that you did something for the Fae, and the Fae did something for you in return. For example, got rid of your sickness. Another thing that happened pretty often actually was people gone missing. Occurrences of people falling into rivers or falling prey to animals, wild animals, and so on, and never returning back home. Or getting lost in the woods, for example, and returning after 4 days, not remembering exactly what happened because of dehydration and perhaps some other types of toxins, for example, if you ate something in the woods. So this is something that also is commonly used. This is a common trope in nowadays pop culture, that the Fae abduct people. And the most common abductions happen to children because children are small. If a child wanders away, the chance that it will wander or find its way back home, well, it's let's say it's smaller. The chance is smaller than chance for an adult to get out of that situation. So this is also a common thing that the Fae were accused of kidnapping children, or what is also interesting, swapping children with their own Feywild children. Now, if a fairy swapped their own child with a human baby, that child that stayed in the material plane in our world would be a changeling, a so-called changeling. Changelings are very, very common in the history of British folklore, of English folklore. They are something strictly different than what we have in D&D nowadays. It's not the changeling, the race that we have. It's something, I would say, vastly different, as they had their own, let's call it, powers and psychic features that they don't fit exactly the race of changelings that you could find in, for example, D&D Eberron. Sometimes people saw natural phenomenons that they also couldn't explain, but that were very, very simple in their nature. So an overgrown bear could be Fey, and the understanding of a simple mind of a medieval farmer. If you saw a huge fish in the lake, you could imagine or conceive that is a human being, since it is so huge. So natural creatures that lived in the wilds are also commonly the cause for people to believe in Fey creatures and the fairies. Lights that happen in the night, fireflies, things that are, well, really, really natural, natural sinkholes, bogs, and so on and so on. Things that nowadays we know what the cause is, but in medieval times, or in not even in medieval times, in Victorian times, there were many, many things that just needed a cause, and the cause was always alien or unnatural. The modern perception of the Fae being little pixies or some kind of humanoid creatures that are exactly we folk is, we have to thank for that William Shakespeare, and especially his Midsummer Night's Dream, which was a very richly illustrated during the later centuries piece of work that because of the language that was used, evoked certain images of the Fae and of the fairies. So that is why the fairies are small. That is why the fairies are, let me quote, gray-coated gnats or little atomies. So you see that this is basically a description of what you could find in Peter Pan, and Tinkerbell was basically exactly a very small fairy. There's a conception that fairies are also responsible for the invisible friends that some people had. I'm doing quotation marks because I don't think that exactly is the case. Although being possessed by a demon or a fairy or a fae could easily be an explanation for people that have sicknesses of the mind. Now, it's just in the 21st century that we start speaking about things like depression, schizophrenia, and so on as normal sicknesses. Earlier, they were kind of a taboo, and even earlier in the 19th century, 18th, 17th century, such sicknesses were commonly misinterpreted as some external forces working on the human body and mind. Now there's this, I'm not even sure if it's a joke or not, but there's this piece of newspaper that I saw from the Victorian era that clearly stated that if you have high blood pressure, it might be caused by demons, and you need morphine to heal yourself, or you need morphine as a cure. So you need to see a doctor that will prescribe you morphine for your demons in your blood. This is the way that people fought in earlier times, and that is the reason why we have so many folklore or mythology elements sucked into the common pop culture that we have today. We were simply all born into such folklore and into such beliefs. In Dungeons and Dragons, we didn't actually have a proper Feywild up until the 4th edition. In the 3rd edition, we had a really small blurb, it's even less than 2 pages long, about the plane of fairy. Now I'm reading the manual of planes over here, and basically the basic premises of the plane of fairy are roughly the same. It's a reflection of the material plane. It has connections to the material plane, but it's not an overlay for the material plane as we know it today. It's rather in the outer planes, and as such it is very strange and very alien to humans and to the inhabitants of the material plane. But there are things that are strictly let's say groundwork for the later editions that talk about fairy in a more strict way. It's interesting that in the 4th edition, the Feywild is described as possibly a dream of the material plane. Not only a reflection, but a dream of the material plane. So what it's something like a beholder dream that can create the reality around them. And this understanding, the material plane creates the Feywild and influences the Feywild and its creation as it is. Now, the 4th edition brings Feywild in the Manual of Planes. It's a whole chapter, not like in the 3rd edition, a small blurb. It's a whole chapter about the Fey, although still it's not something that would be considered, in my opinion, as a whole setting. We did, however, have a separate adventure book in the 4th edition that happened in the Feywild, and that is a book that I would recommend if any of you would like to know something more about the Fey in a more canonical way than we are speaking here. In the 4th edition, the Feywild was described as a, let me quote, wild twin of the mortal realm, and the 5th edition makes the Feywild even closer to the material plane, as it describes it as it's something that is an alternative dimension that uses the same cosmological space as the material plane. Now you see the huge difference between the third edition, where the Feywild was something that was in the outer planes, and the fifth edition that makes the Feywild be in the same cosmological niche as our world, or the material plane. Okay, so knowing all that, we can try to take some of our own folklore and mythology regarding your region from which you are, or perhaps you have an origin that is different than the basic Anglo-Saxon one. Perhaps you are just passionate about mythology, about legends, about history, about storytelling, because that is what this basically is. It's all storytelling, right? So if you just go and reach into your own pocket of legends and fairy tales and see what your passions can bring you, you will find that it's actually very, very easy to incorporate your own Fae into your Feywild and into your world. I have a good example over here. This is a book that we bought some time ago. It's I believe 10 years old. It's a small illustrated bestiary of legends and creatures from the Slavic mythology, and you have all sorts of beautiful things here. Let's take a good example. So you have, not sure if you're going to see this, but you have demons like this, which are basically devils, but you also can find in the same book, you will find creatures that are definitely more insect-like or alien, but animal-like. You will find things like this, which looks basically, well, at least for me, like some sort of undead. But you also have good spirits, and this is one of my favorite all-time favorite pixies or fairies, the lilac. Let me just find him. It's amazing hamster-like creature riding a duck or a goose. It smells like lilac. So what I did recently is I took that book and I just read the stories of different creatures that I found inside, and I picked a few and decided to create a story around them. And you can do the same thing. You can just take a book or an internet resource or whatever else and just push the story into your world in a manner that is natural, because as long as the table understand that it's a story and understand, and on a subconscious level understands the story, as long as that happens, you will have a very good time, I believe, because there's nothing as pleasant as rewriting a known story in a different and new way. I think we can all agree that the most inspiring thing in TTRPG is the lore that comes with settings, with monsters, with histories, with storytelling. So if you have in your folklore, in your origin, in your region, in your knowledge, anything super interesting or just interesting that you would like to share, any monster, any creature, any amazing story that you know of, and you think that it could inspire other DMs or other people or me to create something new and to use in my own game or your games, I am wildly interested in that, and I will be very, very happy if you would leave a comment and just write about your own favorite monster or favorite creature from your backstory. In the next episode, we will talk about Fey portals, Fey crossings, and on how to get into Feywild, or how to get out to Feywild, or how to get parts of Feywild into your world, because it doesn't have to be exactly Feywild. You can take parts of the world and implant them in your own world. I'll see you around, and hopefully you like this episode. If you find it useful, if you got anything out of it, and you think that our DMs might find it useful also, the best thing you can do is put the thumbs up down there. Maybe click like, subscribes, and all the bells and whistles that I don't remember. That helps in visibility of the material and helps me expand on the channel. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you around.